Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Craft Podcast. Today, our guest is Kathi Chandler-Payatt. She is currently the VP of Content Insights and Strategy at MGM. Welcome, Kathi.
Thanks. Excited to talk with you.
Awesome. So let's jump straight into it. Our first question for our guests is always, what is your craft?
I guess simply put, my craft would be insights. And insights mean using data to derive sort of summary level information. What kind of takeaway can we get either about a group of people or maybe a movie or a country? It could be anything about ads, about marketing. So it's taking data and turning it into usable business information.
I've been thinking, especially in the last 10 years, with technology and with more just education on data, I feel like everyone just needs to know data. Maybe you could get away with it if you're like super senior and you have a team dedicated to it, but you kind of have to know the bare minimum yourself. Do you think the insights or analytics function is just going to be like super technical going forward? As I feel like just everyone, like product managers, marketing, like everyone needs to know a little bit of data.
I do, because I think it's how you're conversant in a common language. Now, it doesn't mean you need to like speak in technical speak and be able to like speak to an engineer, but you do need to convey one, like the business question you're trying to solve. Be very clear about what your methodology is, about how they will go, like with the BI team you may be working with, or the engineers that maybe are several levels away from you. But you need to think about, and they need to think about the business side, right? So I think these two things are converging together, where engineers and developers are becoming much more savvy about the business need. And then the business users, like myself, I had to do things like, I realized I needed to learn SQL a few years ago. Like that just was going to help me communicate with my BI team in a much more efficient and clarifying way. It would help me speak their language. So that was what I was always leaning into. I think that especially for executives, as you go up, that is a good competitive advantage, is if you can speak some data, right?
That's a good point. And I never thought about it this way, but from what you just said, insights really sounds like a version of product management.
It is,
because
yeah.
One of the main roles of product management is translating business or high level technical requirements into things that engineers and developers can understand. And the thing is, it's just two different roles. We don't need every developer to become a product manager, right? It just doesn't make sense. No. So that's a good analogy.
No, it is. And product is a really fundamental part of my job, because I can't just, I have to be able to list out my own requirements, understand if they're being met, understand if they're being technically captured correctly. So you can't be too far away from it, right? I can't just give my business question and walk away. I do need to oversee how that, development process is going and be in the weeds with it. And basically, I may be the person who needs to learn the most technically on the team, because I'm not the most technical of my teams. But I look at that like a great opportunity for me. I like learning like all the technical stuff.
I think that's a great attitude. Is there such a thing as like an entry-level insights role? I ask that because I feel like, as you just mentioned, you need to know the most. Are there like other functions and job titles and that a person can start off first before they get into insights? Or what is like the most junior insights type role you can think of?
Oh gosh, it varies. So like at studios, working in research, that usually is an insights role. You'll be using a lot of, especially if you work somewhere with a network, so you're going to use a lot of Nielsen data. That's a form of insights that's usually, you can get in pretty junior and be an analyst or a senior analyst. When I was at Sox, I hired a senior analyst who had an MBA. And even though the role was kind of junior, he was very qualified. He had a CS degree, which I didn't have. So that really brought a lot to the role. He could do a lot of data cleaning in a much more efficient way than I could, much more accurate. But then he also had the business side. So he really, that role was very special and finding him was really difficult. But technically, it was a senior analyst role.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think for most of my career, I have been primarily a consumer of data and insights. And my current role at Facebook, I have to provide insights as well. So it's great to chat with you because it's really timely for myself. Frankly, it's super challenging because there's a lot of information in every company and in the world. And I feel like some people attempt to get to the surface level, but to get the true, quote unquote, it's corny, but to get the true insights is super hard. You really have to go across so many teams' data and their kind of like initial take on things. And I feel like the person who can bring the insight, I remember one of my leaders here, she said, yeah, we're like information rich and insights poor. Like whoever can bring the insights, they're like cheered upon. Which is amazing.
Yeah, it's that, like you said, you have a ton of data, but can you make any business sense out of it? So we know we've got tons of information. We just don't know what to do with all of it because it's not consolidated in a digestible way. And that's basically my job. My job is to, similar to you, right? Like I look at my job like internal consulting. I'm an in-house consultant, and all of my clients are whoever the stakeholders are at the company I'm at. I have to understand how data savvy they are, what their appetite for learning is, because some people really want it handed to them, and some people, if you give them a workbook, they're really happy, right? Because they want to, get in, like, even though it's just Excel, like they just want to like crunch it themselves, and some people want a PowerPoint, some people want you to give them a table in an email, right? So you really learn like different communication styles about how people process the information and at what level of detail is going to be enough, but not overwhelming, but is substantial, right? Because you don't want to be too surface, even if that's not where kind of their learning curve is at the moment, right? So you need to, part of my job is empowering them through knowledge, right? Is empowering all of my clients through knowledge and internally, and bringing them up to, my understanding of the data as much as possible.
That I'll add that to my toolkit as well, because that's such a great point. Especially now that we're working remote and globally, there's just so many ways to communicate, and so many ways that different people want their information communicated to them. And I love your approach of treating them like customers, because that's who they really are. And I think, for a function like insights or any central function on an annual basis, usually people are like checking out headcount and like, hey, should we keep staffing these functions?
That's exactly it.
You have to keep your customers happy. So that's a good point.
That's exactly it. If I'm a cost function, so, I work in a sales org, and I worked in a sales org at Fox, but I am a cost center. Like I don't sell anything personally. And if I kind of don't show that I'm providing ROI either in, measurable quantitative return, like I can get higher license fees, or, my internal stakeholders are saying, oh, I really need Kathi to like, help analyze with me. Like that's really useful when I like consult with her. Then, I may not be around.
My perception, even though I'm starting to do this more now in my current role, was that insights, BI analytics was more hard skills than soft skills. But just, based on our brief conversation so far, I feel like I would even put it 50-50. Really soft skills are just as important as the hard skills. Now, how do you know if you are a master at the insights craft from both technical, like before you mentioned knowing SQL, I do feel like that's kind of like, the foundational stuff, and the soft skills, of which you also mentioned kind of delivering the information in a specific way.
Okay, so how I would probably look at mastery is, I'm thinking it's three parts. And this is where, offline, you were asking me about theater, right? Like I have a theater background, how to get from theater to this. And I do have an artistic background and upbringing. And then, I realized I needed to get a job. So it's kind of strange that I function in both worlds, but that theater background, a lot of it, a lot of people learn in business school, right? Like we learn like yes and we learn spontaneity and we learn improv, and that basically helps with teamwork. So all that theater stuff pays off because I have to do a lot of presentations, and I also have to manage my emotions, right? So when you are presenting to senior people, you cannot show, you have to learn how to function nervous, right? If you get really nervous, you can't look like that. You still have to actually, it's like knowing your lines, right? Like you can't just get nervous and not go on stage, you know, you suck it up and you go. So I'd say being a master is three things. One is understanding your domain area. So I understand that, you know, like windowing, like in entertainment, you know, when a title comes out, if it's a current or a library, if it's exclusive or not, you begin to learn your own content really well. Like I know if a big James Bond movie doesn't do well somewhere, I'm like, that's probably a data problem, right? That doesn't make sense. So one, you have to know your domain area. You can't look at the data and just look at it like some numbers, right? Or some categorical data. Two, you got to have you do need some technical skill, whether it's basics for yourself, like SQL, but you need to be able to apply that domain knowledge to the technical skill. And by that, I mean, you need to know how to clean your data accurately and why you're cleaning your data and be able to explain it, right? Why are we taking this window and not that window? How am I lining all of this up so it's apples to apples? And then third, you need to be able to communicate it. And you need to be able to communicate it for the audience, like specific to the audience that you have, right? So if it's a senior audience, they're going to want it short and high level. Is it a technical audience? You can go as deep as you want. You know, is it like a negotiator, right? So I'm going to need to get to the business justification and show them like some hard facts of, you know, in the numbers, but not too much, right? Because they don't need all of that info. So those would be how I assess what mastery is and insight.
I think now that I think about it, you're actually the first person I know who has a theater background, and you just made the best business case to get like you know, for people who are interested in theater, and to show that just the variety of things they could do afterwards. Because I mentioned this because I feel like we live in an age where everything has to be practical.
Yeah.
And since I'm an instructor at this like online program called Synthesis, I've been tracking kind of what, you know, parents of teenagers want, and a lot of them just want, you know, their kids to succeed. And there's lots of conversations about, hey, what do you do in high school? You have to, like, you know, achieve a lot in high school, and then college, and then picking the right majors. I think you just made a really good case for like liberal arts, because I did a liberal arts background as well, and I had no idea how it would help me in the future. Like I did philosophy, and
wow.
But now looking back, I started connecting the dots, which was what's helped me in my career. Is philosophy is technically, I think the word, the definition is like lover of knowledge or something, or the study of knowledge. And I just love learning. I love learning new information, and that skill, I don't know if that's a hard skill or soft skill, that's been super helpful in my career. So now that you mentioned theater, I want to get into that a bit. So can you tell us about why you chose that, and what did you do after college, and like when did you get into insights?
So I grew up as like a kid actor in the Bay Area doing like professional theater. And so, you know, you're a kid and you're like, I'm going to go do the thing I love and I'm going to go to college, which is weird. Like at the time, it wasn't the thing where you went and got a degree in it, even though now like lots of famous and professional actors go get degrees in theater at four-year colleges. It's normal. But at the time when I went, it wasn't. It was sort of like, why are you going? Just go to New York, you know, like that degree for that specific field isn't really necessary. But I did get to learn about a lot of other things in college, including like philosophy. I really liked that. So like I tried kind of the acting thing for a couple of years, and that wasn't really panning out. And I ended up getting a job at a media buying company like in the mid 2000s. And this was when like buying, you know, Google was Google, but it wasn't the Google we have today, right? And people were trying to understand online media buying, like how to buy a display ad, right? What is a CPM? What is a CPC, right? And like these agencies were brand new. And so I actually really liked learning about, like, even though I wasn't technical, I liked technology and I wanted to understand new stuff. And so like I began learning about the ad world. And that wasn't really quite for me, but it ended up helping me evolve into like I still wanted to go back to entertainment, because even if I wasn't like a performer in entertainment, it's something that I really have an emotional connection to. So, and something that I know a lot about. So I could leverage all of, like the fact I work at MGM, I used to grow up watching really, really old movies like from the 40s. So like when I got my job at MGM, I was like, oh, I have some pretty good domain knowledge about this company, like this is part of my background. But yeah, it leveraged me into consulting. And then I realized I would need an MBA to get more, to be kind of like, the title and financial levels that I wanted to live. And that pushed me into going to business school. And at business school, that was the first place where I saw like structured analytics classes, right? Like where you learn R, or how you learn to think about data and what you're trying to learn and how to format your data, right? Like those simple things I had no exposure to before. So yeah, it really was just a practical thing. I needed to get a job, and I happened to get into sort of that world in the very first job out of school I got.
You know what's funny? Because we've had so many guests. I think like number 16 or 17. These origin stories, everyone is like, yeah, I just got lucky. It kind of worked out.
I just got lucky.
But it kind of isn't though. It's like, you know why? Because like, I feel like most of the people we've been interviewing, I do think they're like masters of their craft. And I do think a big part of the craft, kind of what you're saying, is any craft is domain knowledge. And part of domain knowledge is you just have to be passionate about it. So a lot of our guests are gaming esports, and these people just, like, including myself, we just love it, and it doesn't feel like a job. And I think for you, just hearing about your love of movies and theater background, and then you ended up doing research for SVOD, AVOD, and then you started working for networks and studios. It does sound like almost like a perfect linear story, but I think a lot of this really just it's a perfect concoction of really like believing your what you're passionate about and going down that path. And I mean, it sounds like you kind of worked your way to like a kind of a nice spot that you have right now. It wasn't just like starting off, yes, I'm doing X, Y, and Z, and I definitely know it 100%.
No, there's definitely some timing luck in that, but you're right. Like if I didn't happen to like the job, or I didn't like analytics at all in my first job, I definitely wouldn't have continued. There were industries like, automotive, right? I did some really interesting work in automotive in it's basically first and third party data, like blending them together and deriving information about your audiences, like, do people like rugby, or do people like hockey that are in the market to buy a Scion? But automotive wasn't for me. Like, that was really clear, and like, I liked the insights of it. I did not like the field of it. So I probably, you're right, I probably would have pivoted out. But I think going back to your point about like the high schoolers that you teach and their parents are all concerned. Look, I've looked at my own story and been like, why isn't my story more linear? Like, why didn't I go get, I don't know, a finance BA and then an MBA, and then I worked at like a hedge fund. And like, sometimes when I see people's stories like that, I'm like, wow, their story is so linear, so easy to understand. But I think that not one thing I've ever learned has ever gone to waste. Not one. Like, even like the ad data I was just mentioning, I was like, oh, I'll probably never do that after I leave automotive. Nope, that's all happening in the world right now, right? Like, all that is happening right now in the way that we understand privacy, in the way that we understand how ads are being served to us, what companies know about us, all of that. And in entertainment, we're getting more ads. People are more tolerant of ads than they've ever been before. So companies have to learn about it. Companies that were normally like, oh, it's all SVOD, there's no ads. It's like, that's Hulu. It's like, no, that's a lot of companies now. So I think nothing's ever like the genuine thirst for knowledge, it's never wasted. Like, I bet in philosophy, you're a really, really fast processor, I've noticed. Like, you think really fast. And I bet you probably always thought really fast, but probably being in philosophy, you had to sharpen it because you have to do logic, right? So yeah, like, and defend everything until that you get down to something like, I don't know, right? Until it's undefendable. And that is a really difficult skill that you can apply to everything.
I think that's such a good attitude because sometimes I'm sure you've and other people have experienced this. Work just sucks and you're not sure what this project is about.
Yeah,
It may be boring, it might be crappy, but I have to agree with you. Even the boring projects or crappy projects, I've always learned something
you
and
do.
they help in the most weird
In
way.
the weirdest ways.
Yeah.
Like somehow you learn like, oh, this project maybe didn't go to much, but I learned a new efficient way of doing something. Oh, okay, I'll do that in the future. Or there's always something that you get out of it if you really look for it. Yeah.
Oh, totally. Let me give you this totally random story. When I was a brand new product manager at Riot Games, I knew nothing about product. That was my first product or just first job out of MBA. The way Riot and many other gaming slash tech companies work is that as a PM, as a new PM, you kind of get tested. You don't just get on a project. It's usually finding something to improve first versus like launching something brand new. And you have to like make a mock-up or MVP yourself. So I ended up just focusing on how to create these like internal websites to check how our like how the quote unquote the business is truly doing, but
That's cool.
visualize it in a way that executives care about, or frankly, it was just sexy. For example, I found there's like some open source code where Google had where it's like a globe and you could just like use your mouse and scroll it. And you could put whatever KPI you want. It could be something like, okay, here's sales, or here's game sales, here's latency, and it's just a spreadsheet. And you put the spreadsheet in the code, and like even I figured out I didn't know how to code, but just learn how to like tweak it a bit. And you get this crazy, awesome. It looks like super more advanced like globe that goes around, and the data points aren't numbers. It's like the length or the height of the line. So it looks beautiful
Oh,
and there's colors and everyone's like, oh my God, it's so fancy.
it's pretty. Yeah, yeah.
And I ended up not doing much with basically like, website stuff at Riot. But because I was just like, I nerded out just a couple months on it, when I got to Amazon Games, they were like, hey, we need someone to run our websites. Who wants to volunteer? And I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to be interested. And then I got to do things that I never, like I learned so much about websites. Like websites are complex. I mean, we don't think about it because, it's like, oh yeah, you go to Amazon. Amazon.com. First of all, that's like a web app. That's different. That's just
Right.
super complex. But even like more simple websites, nothing is simple anymore. There's so much to it. It's an entire project in itself. You mentioned ads, so I want to get into that, which is something was very surprising to me when I was at Amazon, is IMDb TV just crushing it. And during that time, I was also just like monitoring like Roku stock, which has gone like gangbuster. So you briefly mentioned it earlier, like what happened with like AVOD? Like why is it doing so well? I don't understand why.
So this is my theory personally is, the incremental dollar on SVOD and just the incremental. So anytime like a service raises its rates, right? Even though it's only $1, people rebel, and that makes sense because now people, I think at the stat I just saw from TiVo a couple of days ago was something like 8 services in the United States. People use at least 8 services. Like I think it's SVOD and AVOD together. Well, let's say each of the services you use 5, and that's $10 each, right? Do you use all the services? Consumers are getting really savvy about churning and like turning it on and off like light switch. And they also, not everyone like looks at $1 the same way. Sometimes $1 means a lot. So, people may be more price sensitive. So I think what AVOD does is it gives you a lot of that fix for, fun content, maybe content that's old that you've seen before, right? Or if you need to entertain your kids, right, really cheaply, right, they'll watch stuff over and over. That is a really, really good solution. And I think people are getting tired also of just having that stacked SVOD bundle that they don't know where anything is, so Roku's probably, oh man, I don't know if they're the top in my genius category, but they're up there in my genius strategy category because they came in as a device, almost like, like a Trojan horse, right? And everyone needed to get on to Roku, and they scaled that really well. And then they slipped in the fact that they were going to have content and ads. And now no, you can't live without Roku. Like everyone has to be on Roku. So they became like an ad tech, and ultimately will become, they're becoming a content company as they started, but that was never how it looked in the beginning. And so they realized there was some incremental viewing that people were doing. They were looking for something that they weren't finding on Netflix. They weren't finding on, Hulu. But they were willing to watch something, right? They just didn't maybe know what it was.
Wow, yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, as I said, I didn't really pay attention to AVOD at all until I started just like working with the IMDb TV team a bit, and was very surprised with how they're doing. Did want to follow up on this whole as just like subscriptions, as far as subscriptions, because I just did what you just said, which is when I was just in Korea, and since there's like different rights for each show,
Yep.
Homeland is available in Korea, but not in the US. That makes sense.
Yep.
And I watched like season 6 to 8. But then I'm like, hey, I never watched season 5. I know I didn't watch season 5, and I'm not sure if I watched season 4. So I just signed up for a Showtime subscription, free trial actually, through Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
And it's crazy because even though I'm not price sensitive, I'm totally like thinking about, hey, can I finish season 4 and 5 before the trial ends, so that I don't have to
Yes.
pay like $10.99.
Yes.
And then if I can't make it in time, I'm like, okay, cool, I'll pay the $10.99, but like that's it. I'll stop watching it. And I just never thought about how people even deal with that from like a insights perspective. It's super fascinating because the only time I've dealt with the subscription service is when I was at Amazon Kids. And generally, I think the high level of how the behavior went there was you just had a service for your kid. I mean, they're always going to watch it, and then maybe they age out. It's different than like a kid was signed up for Amazon Kids via their parents to watch one show and then cancel it until the next season.
Yeah, no. But that point about, so I should send you a chart. It'd be so fun to show as part of this. So it's a Google Trends chart. So it's public information. And it was the last season of Game of Thrones. And when the season, I think the first episode, the chart peaks at the terms cancel HBO. So people are already thinking about it, right? They're like, oh, you know what? I've got 7 more weeks. Like just what you did. They thought, how much longer am I going to pay for this subscription? Okay, so I can budget, right? And then right at the finale, the cancel HBO spikes really high. And it's like, y'all watched the finale and canceled 10 seconds later. You like could not wait to just figure out how hard it was going to be to cancel. And that was, really when there was more pay TV. There was no HBO Max yet. So no, people were that rationale of, I don't know what to watch next. There's nothing in my mental queue, right? Like for you, there's nothing in your mental queue on Showtime. You don't want to watch, like, I don't know, Black Monday, which you should. It's a great show. But you don't have something lined up. What you have lined up is in your list is I'm going to cancel. And in Game of Thrones, what people were automatically lined up, they weren't thinking, oh, I'm going to go watch Euphoria next. They're thinking, this is through Comcast. It's kind of expensive. There's no other reason. Why am I here? That was the only reason I kept it. So yeah, people are thinking down the line. Like if you don't kind of reserve space in their head, in their mental queue, which is hard to do, right? Because there's so much content, it's overwhelming. That if people don't think, oh God, you know what, I've got to keep Disney Plus because The Mandalorian's coming back. Like they're thinking about it, right? So, or if you're not the person that's like, I just have to watch The Office all the time, so I need it around. That's my roommate. I like it around. Then you're kind of at risk of churning, and I think it's only going to get worse because people are sort of, all these platforms have these increasing tidal waves of content. So the windows of it being hot, it's going to get tighter, right?
Yeah, I think that's such a good point again, because as I started digging into Homeland, I'm like, wait a minute, I forgot Billions is on Showtime too.
Billions,
and I only watched 2 seasons of that. So I'm like, oh, okay, and then you just mentioned that show, so I might go watch that. And
right.
but you're right. I never thought about like canceling a subscription as the next show, because now that we're talking about this, I'm like, okay, great. Okay, so maybe for the next month or two, maybe, you know, I don't try to binge it. I watch Homeland, I watch Billions, I watch the show you were talking about, and then I cancel it. And then I remember there's like a new season of Mandalorian, I think, and there's a bunch of new Disney stuff. Okay, so I'm gonna reactivate Disney to watch that. Just like I signed up for HBO Max just to watch like Justice League, the Snyder Cut or something.
Right, the Snyder Cut.
But I cancel afterwards. Yeah. So and actually a broader point is that I think the costs do add up because you know we're just talking about like SVOD, but I've also got like New York Times subscription. I've got like Spotify, like there's music, there's media,
Audible.
Right? Audible, there you go.
Audible,
yeah.
Right? Oh, if you have an Amazon Prime regular, like annual subscription, right? Just that alone, which no one's getting rid of because it's now a utility, right? No one is getting rid of their $100 a year Amazon Prime shipping.
I forgot all about it. I've been paying, I don't even think about it because you're like, oh, like you have to do it. It's such that's another genius move, I have to say. Like Amazon Prime's another top genius move.
It is. I mean, Netflix, I think people look at as a utility too. Visa, the credit card company, did a study and they realized, and actually their data is probably really cool to do this study on. They said, you know, we really just see Netflix looking like a utility to people. That's what it looks like. They keep it, whether they use it or not, you know, like the water bill. That's the way to look at it.
Awesome. Okay, final question for you, which is another interesting trend I've seen. Clearly, there's just too many SVOD services, in my opinion. Like you can't even keep track of it all. When you think about it, like some of the I heard some of the shows on Paramount Plus are actually pretty good, but since they're just growing, they're not gonna get like the Netflix bump. And not every Netflix show is successful, but at least you have a better chance of getting like 200 million subscribers, right? Eyeballs on it. What do you think about potential like consolidation in the future? Because these content budgets are super expensive. I think most customers don't think they need Netflix, Paramount Plus, Peacock, HBO Max, you know, just like 10 plus services. When, like, you know, do you have like a general sense of just made up, just your opinion, like, you know, in the next 5 years, there's like a consolidation next 3 years?
We're going toward it. So you can see where I think we're consolidating is let's take like Viacom and Comcast, right? So Comcast is a MVPD. That's what they do, right? But they also have, you know, an additional streaming platform. They have a linear channel that's broadcast. They have a suite of, you know, carriage deals. But I think what they're basically trying to do is become like an over-the-top MVPD, but within their own ecosystem. It used to be, oh, everyone's going vertical on SVOD, like Viacom, right? You have a suite of SVOD channels. No, I think you're having a suite of channels across every media. And if you can capture transaction too, that would be great, right? That's probably something like, you know, Viacom doesn't have that part, but NBC actually does. They have Fandango and Vudu. So and they've got the movie ticket data, right? So that's like, I think what people are trying to do is own the end-to-end windowing within their ecosystem. And probably the way to do that is getting closer to the niche content, like the real fan group. So probably why Sony bought Crunchyroll, right? I don't think Sony's trying to do a big over-the-top strategy. That's not why, but they create some of the best content for all of these services. So they need to have a good engine. So I think these, like the Acorn TVs of the world, right? The BritBoxes of the world, the like niche, but very enthusiast platforms, those may go to other people potentially one day, right? I know Acorn and BritBox or Acorn is AMC, but so I don't know how likely it is they could get bought. But I think that these niche content things, these are the things where there's one show, that show becomes luckily viral. And everyone now wants to go watch, you know, the equivalent of the new Downton Abbey, right? And no one saw that coming. But it comes out of these niche enthusiast groups. So and you need to have a broad service like a Netflix, but I think what becomes viral is this unusual, specific content, very specific content.
Well, thank you for coming on and sharing all of your insights on the craft, on the entertainment
But
industry. Honestly, my main takeaway is that we're kind of just like blessed to be working in the broader like entertainment gaming sector, because there's so much technology that's getting infused into both. There's like changing business models. There's huge players like, Comcast, like big media players, big tech, huge. And there's just lots of like money and attention and energy being thrown into space. And it's just an exciting, place to be right now.
I totally agree. It's so much fun. Honestly, it's so much fun to also learn about something that's really just in like our culture, and that everybody, no matter what they do, they tend to have some emotional relationship with it, to some degree. Yeah, I love the entertaining the world thing.